How many hats are you wearing in your ministry? I can almost guarantee you're wearing more than just the student ministry hat in your church. Whether you're wearing 10 hats or just a couple, today's conversation is for you. Get ready for the Student Ministry Podcast. Welcome to the Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Steve Cullum, and today we're going to be talking with Jeremey Veal. Jeremey is the pastor of student ministries at Greenville First Nazarene in South Carolina, and he wears a lot of hats, especially currently at his church, and we're going to talk about that and so much more. Before we jump into that conversation, we do want to thank you so much for being here. If you haven't recommended this podcast to another friend in youth ministry, we just encourage you to do that. And also, if you like what you hear, please be sure to rate us and recommend us and all those sort of things. It really does help. Also, we want to thank our sponsor of this episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. G-Shades is a youth ministry curriculum and teaching strategy focused on helping students see every life situation through the lens of the gospel. There's several options to fit everyone with 3 plans to choose from. This curriculum gives you the resources that you need to do what you do better. Do you need message outlines, a discussion guide, and a game? That's just $16 a month. If you're looking for a higher production value, including bumper videos, Instagram devotionals, and parent guides, that's $25 a month. And do you want an affordable youth ministry video curriculum that can help you increase your online reach during this pandemic? G-Shades has you covered for $36 a month. You will not find a better youth ministry video curriculum at that price point anywhere. G-Shades really sets itself apart by helping students see the gospel applies to every life situation that is out there. And if you want to find out more about Mike Haynes, the founder of G-Shades, you can check out episodes 32 and 55 of the Student Ministry Podcast. So go ahead and head over to gshades.org to download Season 3 of G-Shades Youth Ministry Curriculum. And be sure to use the promo code TSMPOD for the Student Ministry Podcast at checkout to get an extra 10% off. gshades.org and use the promo code TSMPOD. G-Shades, seeing life through the lens of the gospel. You can find the link for G-Shades in the podcast show notes. Thanks so much, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. With all that being said, let's jump into this conversation with Jeremey Veal. Hey, Jeremey, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to sharing with you and being able to connect with you a little bit.
Yeah, it's been great to get to know you a little bit over the last few years. I'm not even sure when we first met. It was probably through Download Youth Ministry and the different connections we got through DYM. But yeah, I'd love to, just before we dig into ministry stuff or anything like that, just to give myself, I'm interested in your story, but also our podcast audience, just to kind of hear your story, how God's brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am in Greenville, South Carolina as a youth pastor at a Nazarene church there. And I've been in ministry for 14 years now, but I actually have been the product of, or really the offspring of the church for a really, really long time, because I grew up in a bus ministry in Alabama. And so my home church there drove to different neighborhoods, picked up kids, brought them to the church, and, really just poured a lot of love into my life and impacted me in that way. Specifically, what ended up happening was that I just really started to see God in a bigger way than what I expected, and showing me what the church looks like to really love people. And so the church wrapped their arms around me, loved me, cared for me, supported me. And through that is where I really just grew to love Christ and grew to love his church even more. And it's really one of the things that is a passionate driving force for me for why I do what I do now, is because I've experienced and seen firsthand of of what it looks like for the church to touch people's lives. And so I just love what I get to do. Love getting to be a part of teenagers' lives and helping lead others and showing others Christ in the same way that the church has shown me.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
So did you have any ministry background in your family at all? Or are you the first person
I
to go for a career in ministry?
I am the first, and what's funny is a lot of my family and even friends from high school, when I tell them I'm a pastor, they're like, "What? You for real? How did that happen?" I was like, "Well, it's just God. I don't know how it happened, but no, I am the first in my family. So actually, one of the first ones to graduate college as well. And so, the hope is to start a new legacy with myself and with my wife and my kids. So
that's awesome. So did you
yeah.
go to school for ministry specifically?
I did. I went to Trevecca Nazarene University in Nashville, Tennessee. Go Trojans! It's one of 8 Nazarene schools, and so that's where I met my wife. We were actually on a mission trip, and she did not like me at all, and so, but somehow I wooed her. But
nice.
Yeah, I went to Trevecca to study youth ministry and got my degree there, and then started to pursue my master's, but ended up having to drop it just because of some life stuff that happened with our family, and but hoping to pick that back up here soon, actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
So you've been in ministry for a number of years. Have you always been in the same church, or have you been in a couple different situations?
I've been in a couple of different churches. The church that I'm currently at was actually the very first church that I started at right out of college. And over the last, I've been back here for 4 years now. So 4 years ago, the pastor that was here at the time asked me if I would come back, but I started out here right out of college and then was here for 5 years. Then we moved to Texas and then to North Carolina and then to Alabama to my home church for a couple of years. And then we landed back here.
Wow. That's going to be interesting. And like, what's the dynamic there? Like coming back to a church that you used to serve at?
It has definitely been interesting. One of the biggest comments that I get all the time is, "Man, you're not that stubborn college kid that you were when you were here the first time." And the other thing is, and it does show my growth to where people have recognized that, and I have to admit, my stubbornness and just the little antics that I pulled when I was here before, but they're recognizing the growth and leadership development that's happened in me. But it's definitely been really nice, especially since, more than anything else, and this is the coolest thing coming back, is 90% of my youth leaders are my former students that have stayed here, plugged in, and helped lead the church in a number of different ways. And so 90% of my youth leaders are my former students who are now married, and several of them have kids of their own.
Wow.
In fact, 2 of them just gave birth this last week to their first child, and so it's fun for me getting to come back and see them and see the way that God has continued to work through them and to do ministry with them now.
That's really awesome. Yeah. I was thinking back when I realized that, like, a few years ago when Doug Fields went back to Mariners, like his church that he started out. I'm like, man, that must be so interesting coming back after a number of years to see, generations are different, but that's really cool to see that legacy that you even as a, what you said, a stubborn, college student, but you were still able to make an impact, and now you're seeing the fruit of that. And so many of us don't really get to see that fruit. So that's
I'll
really
tell
awesome.
you this, one of the beautiful things for me is that when I first left here, when I left here the first time, I was really discouraged. I felt like I didn't get to see the fruit of my ministry here. We made a lot of changes, and there was a lot of transition that happened when I left. And though our youth ministry had grown and we had some good days, I really felt like there were so many things that had to be worked on that I didn't get to see the fruit of that. And so
Mm.
coming back and seeing these guys plugged in, leading, making changes, making or leading with influence in different places, it really was a healing in the very beginning, coming back of God just saying, Jeremy, I'm using you. Pay attention to that. Don't get so hung up on yourself and what you've done, but pay attention to what I'm doing through you and what I've done through you. And so it was definitely a very meaningful and touching thing to come back and to be able to do ministry with these guys.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your ministry
Yeah.
there. Can you just kind of run through quickly, like what does it look like for you to do youth ministry there? What's your kind of program structure, or how you approach ministry at your church?
Yeah. So I am really big on um, allowing our leaders to lead, and to take on more responsibility. This isn't something that just being completely honest, isn't something that I've always done, but over the last several years, I've been listening, reading, and learning more about just giving my ministry away and allowing those that I call volunteers and leaders to actually lead. And so over the last several years, I've been pouring more energy and effort into our youth leaders and equipping them to be the leaders that God's called them to be. In fact, a couple of years ago at the Orange Conference, a phrase that was, or part of the theme from the Orange Conference that stuck out to me and has become sort of a motto or personal mission statement for me, is just the idea that who you are and what you do matters. And so that's something that I end up reiterating to our youth leaders all the time, as well as to our students, and letting them know that they too can make an impact in the things that they do. But I've just began pouring a lot more energy and effort into our youth leaders and seeing the results of that, letting them take the lead on things that I've always done, but now relinquishing that to them and allowing God to work through them. And it's strengthened our ministry. And so typically the way things are set up for us, we have, as part of our denomination, we have events that are part of our district that we participate in, but we also have several events that we put together for our students on our own, and we've been rethinking and revisioning how we best disciple our students. And so when I first got back here, I sat down with our pastor, and we talked through what it looked like to disciple students, and we stripped away a lot of different things. We pulled back things and decided, you know what, if we're going to be effective with our students, there's some things that we're just going to have to cut out and stop doing. And it's not been easy for some of our families and some of our students, but it has been effective. And so we now shifted from doing all of our small groups on Sunday nights to our small group time following our large group gathering on Wednesday nights. And what that has done has allowed us to not add an extra night of the week for students to be out or families to have to travel and drop off students or anything like that. And so it's been, as well as our youth leaders not having to add another night to their schedule. But it's been really nice to see just how that is operating. We realized that there were definitely other opportunities for us to have more intentional, in-depth conversations with smaller groups. And so we eventually did launch other groups during the week, like for instance, a Thursday night Bible study that I lead, and some of our guys and girls groups, but we narrowed things down to have a more direct focus for our students.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before you were running ministry, like at least a program on Sunday night and Wednesday night, both.
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
doing Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then any extra activities from
Mm,
just our yearly calendar, including district events. And it just seemed like every weekend, just boom,
mm,
boom, 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 boom.
yeah.
And then you add on top of that ball games from the high schools, and then plays and concerts and all
Right.
that. And we were
Yeah.
just wearing our parents out. We were wearing our youth leaders out. I was being worn out,
Yeah.
and our students were being worn out, going from place to place. And just what we've seen now is it's almost just given everybody a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's actually, I think that's really interesting. I've talked to a lot of different youth pastors who are kind of in that similar boat. Like, we've got to clear the calendar.
Yeah.
If we want students to actually live out their faith, then we need
Hmm.
to give them time to go and live out their faith instead of just
Yeah.
expecting them to be at the church all the time.
Well, and the other thing is one of the things that we've started focusing on. In fact, I'm really excited because I have a youth leader who brought this idea to me. Um, we're trying to look at things from a holistic approach, and really impact students wholly. And so one of my youth leaders, she is a academic advisor at Furman University, which is in our backyard. And we just, especially with the pandemic, we've heard students talk about just the stress levels that they're dealing with and how that's impacted their sleep, the sleep that they have, as well as just their studying skills. And so we're actually working right now of, instead of just focusing on, and it may sound bad, but instead of just focusing on just doing Bible studies,
Mm,
why not create content or opportunities for us to speak into helping our students learn how to study better?
mm.
And part of it is just that if we can help our students be better on all levels, then they'll engage better as well. And
Yeah.
so this one youth worker, we're putting together some online content to where she's going to do walk through some different hacks and skills to help our students know how to study for school better.
Nice. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
that's meeting a need right there.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So instead of just, yes, we should be about the Bible, and yes, we should be
Hmm.
promoting Jesus, but we can do that in a number of different avenues. That's really
Absolutely.
cool to kind of, meet those students where they are.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I know you're wearing a lot of hats right now at your church, because
Yeah.
currently you're the only pastor on staff.
Yeah.
So that kind of fell in your lap. Could you care to like just explain a little bit of that, a little, to kind of give our audience just a bit of insight? And then also, I'd love to hear more about how you have equipped your team in order to lead while you're kind of taking care of a lot more things than just student ministry right now.
Yeah. So last March, well, part of our denomination, we have our lead pastors have every 2 years, or every 2 years, they have pastoral reviews. And so we have a district superintendent who oversees our district throughout the state of South Carolina. He comes in, meets with our board, they do a pastoral review. So last March, our pastor that was here had his pastoral review, and it didn't go as well as he expected. And almost immediately after that, you could see the visible signs of he's pulling away,
Mm,
and he's burned out. And so there were just different things that slowly started to be dropped, or just not cared for in the way that they were before. And so myself and our staff that we had at the time, we started picking up different pieces there to try to help keep things moving along and encourage him. Uh, and then he went on sabbatical in the beginning of May. Um, and during that time, I took on most of the preaching responsibilities, along with our youth ministry and other things that I was already picking up. Um, and he was on sabbatical for 6 weeks, and the hope was that he was going to get the rest that he needed to kind of refresh and come back excited and renewed. But then he came back, announced his resignation, and then everything just kind of crumbled
Mm.
quickly. And he, to be completely honest, and I still, I love him, but he didn't leave well, and it caused a lot of hurt in the church. And so myself and the rest of our staff, we just decided, okay, we've got to keep things moving along. And so we entered into this transition as a church of looking for a new lead pastor, and we split up different responsibilities. And I just ended up taking on the heavier load than everybody. But then months in, things just kind of got a little rocky, and our worship pastor, who had been here for I don't know, 30 plus years, he decided to go ahead and resign. And I'll actually back up. When our pastor resigned, he actually also took our daycare director. And so our daycare director left with him to Florida to help start a new church. And there was a hole at our daycare that we have at the church. There was a hole at the church with not having a lead pastor. And so one thing after the other, it was just boom, boom, boom. And just the up and downs of running a daycare, and then all the church responsibilities. It's just been one thing after the other stacked on top. And after our worship pastor left, we were also just kind of, our children's pastor and I were hoping just to both hang in there, keep things going. But then our children's pastor decided to leave, and she just left in the last week or so. But now it's just me, and it has been, to be honest, I shared with you, it's been heavy, it's been
Mm.
hard, it's been heavy, and very, very exhausting. um, but with that, thankfully, my leaders, my youth leaders and volunteers, uh, they were appreciative of the extra work that I was putting in for the church and helping the church move along, giving really new excitement and vision to the church. But they came to me and said, "Dude, we love you. We think you're a great youth pastor. We definitely hope you know that. But we don't want you to burn out. We don't want you to just, you know, be wiped out from everything. So let us just worry about the youth group."
Mm.
And that again, that wasn't completely easy for me, but because of what God had been doing and really preparing me for, I just said, "All right, yeah, let's go. You guys take the lead on things. I'll come along side you. I'll support you. Where you need help, I'll be there. But I'm letting you take the lead." And so I just unleashed them, and man, they've kicked butt with that. They've reimagined youth ministry in ways that I never thought about, and just with some of the things that we were doing that they never said to me, "I'm not real big on that." They just kind of went with it, but then they got a hold of it, and there were some things that they changed, some things that they brought back. Um, but they've excelled with it, and they're running with it, and
Mm.
they're pouring into our students in ways that are beyond what I could ever do. And
Mm.
so having them take on those responsibilities have been a huge blessing, and not forgetting me either.
Yeah.
Making sure I'm still in the loop, and making sure that our students and our parents are cared for. In fact, an example, one of the things that they did, early on with two things early on with the pandemic. They did, everyone was doing sort of like the drive-by parades and stuff like that. Well, they ordered these crazy costumes off of Amazon, and we all carpooled and went to each of our students' houses, made these big signs and stuff like that. made one of my youth leaders. She's just super creative and has an Etsy store and all these things. And she made each student a gift bag, um, and all these things in there. And the fact that they thought of that before I mentioned anything just showed me what a win it was to let them have everything. And
Yeah.
then the other thing, just the creativity they put into moving our services outside, which I think none of us ever would have thought of, especially when you have, big, buildings that like we have. We've got a huge, student center that tons of money have been poured into, and the thought of doing services out in the parking lot when we have all the gadgets and gizmos inside the building, they just became really creative in how we did that and what we did. And our students are actually asking now, hey, can we go back out, do services back outside? And
Nice.
it showed us something new, a new way to engage. And so, kudos to them for being imaginative and, putting in the work to create a nice environment and also just an intentional space to connect with students. And so
Yeah.
I've been really, really proud of them
That's
for
awesome.
everything.
That's
Yeah.
so good. And I'm sure you've noticed this, Jeremy, but I just want to call out the thing that stands out to me most is what you said near the beginning, that 90% of your team are
Yeah.
former students.
Yeah.
That's got to be so cool
It
to be able to
is.
see that happen. Like their love for you, their respect for you, the
Yeah.
way you imparted all that on them as they were teenagers, and now
Yeah.
they're ready to really take the lead and make that impact on the next generation. That's
Yeah.
amazing, Jeremy.
Yeah. It's one of the highlights of my 14 years of ministry. It
Mm,
really is. Yeah.
that's so cool.
Mhm.
So did it, did you take any specific steps that maybe other youth pastors out there could hear and go, okay, yeah, I could start implementing that kind of thing as well to be able to pass things off to my team and empower them a little bit more?
Yeah. One thing that kept ringing in the back of my mind was something that I heard Doug Field say at a youth ministry conference somewhere. Just the thought of you're not that important. um, we as youth pastors and just as ministry leaders, we have a tendency to think we're really that important, but we're not. And so I had to let that really sink in for me of, Jeremy, this isn't about you. You're not, you know, you're not that important. So allow God to really use the people that you are calling leaders. I mean, look at them and see them as leaders, and that they have gifts, they have skills, not just the ones that I recognize, but things that I don't recognize, and let God do what he does best.
Yeah.
So that was a starting point for me, was trying to remove myself from the equation, my ego, my pride, my insecurities, and to just say, you know what, I'm going to trust that God is in this and that God can use this. But we also put in place an evaluation system to where we are. It's not this that I've just given them full responsibility of everything. There's some things to where essentially, I can throw the flag on the play and say, hey, we need to pull back and think about this, and we evaluate things together on that. But one of the other cool things that we did, um, to really motivate them and encourage them and saying to them, look, I am giving you this ministry, was looking at our budget. We changed up some things to where I then divvied up things and gave each of our small group leaders $500 budget for themselves. And what I said was, this is your budget for your small group. You do whatever you want with it. I'm no
Mm,
longer going to say you got to do. We're going to do these things this way. I gave each of our small group leaders $500 and said, you do whatever you want to do with your small group with that money. If it's taking kids to lunch, you take them to lunch. If it's getting coffee with students, if it's going bowling with your group, you've got $500 for the year. And that just empowered them. It really more than anything else.
Hmm.
And we've got a system for them to turn in receipts and stuff like that. But it's just a new way for me to think about doing ministry. Uh, and the results of it is just more impact on their end.
Hmm.
They're loving it more and more, and our students are loving it. Our students have more influence and more voices in their lives that are leading them and constantly pointing them to Christ. And so, and then I also decided, instead of you know when looking at things with the budget, for instance, I always put together different things for me to send handwritten cards and stuff to our youth leaders. But I gave them with that $500, each of them enough, made some really nice printed material and said, look, you've got enough cards for each of your students to send at least 10 cards throughout the year of just, hey, thinking of you. And then you've got a birthday card for each of your students in your small group. Just make sure that it is something that you are doing, and just that added touch. And I don't remember where I got the idea from, but it has been a huge blessing, and we're seeing really nice results from it. So
That's so awesome. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it to me, it kind of seems like you've just really elevated their role. And
Hmm.
instead of, I'm going to set you up for success. I'm going to
Yeah.
give you the tools you need. I'm going to give you the resources you need.
Yeah.
And, I'll be here. I'm not completely stepping out of the picture, but I'm setting you up for success, and,
Yeah.
in every sense of the word. And that's so cool.
Yeah.
You've been able to see the fruit of that.
One of the things I've told them over and over is I really want them um, to be the type of youth leader that they needed when they were
Mm,
teenagers. And you know, being that most of them were in my youth group when I first started, I was unfortunately the lone ranger here. I did I kind of operated out of a solo ministry, which was one of the reasons why I felt like a failure and
mm,
felt like I didn't see the fruit of our ministry. That's something I acknowledge now, but knowing that they needed other voices, other influences as teenagers. Um, I just want to encourage them more than anything else to be that type of leader that either their boneheaded youth pastor did not provide for them, or that the church just did not equip them with. That they can be that type of leader now. So
mm. That's so good. That's so
yeah,
good. Well, Jeremy, you've shared a lot of great wisdom already, but I want to give you a chance to share any other tips or encouragements to our audience today. You got an audience of youth pastors that are out
yeah.
there that are listening today. What kind of encouragements or tips would you like to leave them with today?
One of the biggest things I would say, especially coming out of this pandemic, and knowing we're not done with things yet, with all the added extra stress that we've had with a number of things, all the extra responsibility that I've taken on. One of the big things that my wife and I decided was that we have to make sure to get counseling.
Mm,
And I think just the church needs to make that a part of their everyday practice. Adopting the language that mental health is okay. And so whether you are at a place of burnout, you're overwhelmed, stressed, or whatever, or even if you feel like you're in a good place, more than anything else, I would say the starting point for all of us is to seek the type of counseling that we all need and could use, and not to be afraid of that, um, but to embrace it. And you will become so much healthier
mm,
if you embrace that. And so that would be the first thing that I would encourage everyone with. But then also, um, I'd say more than anything else, that we as youth pastors have a huge opportunity before us to really lead the charge with the church in regards to developing good Christian leaders.
mm.
And so take the time to invest in your leaders. more than anything else. If you want to see your youth ministry thrive, take the time to invest in those that are called to work with your students. Be okay with the fact that not everybody's going to be a good fit, and you may have to let some people go, but invest in the people that are there to serve with you and serve your students. So those would be the two biggest things.
That's so good. Yeah. I mean, I totally echo both of those things. Yeah. Our mental health is so big. I mean, there's so many of us that are struggling, like we're probably already struggling at some level. And then pandemic and everything else that's happening in the world has just added to that and kind of multiplied it. And many of us are stretched thin in ministry right now. And so that adds more stress and could potentially add more stress to your family, all that stuff. That's really important. But yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the whole idea of like really caring for your leaders. And I think that's something that a journey that I've been through over the last several years as well, because I think most of us got into youth ministry because we enjoy hanging out with teenagers. But then after you get into it more, you're like, oh, I need to be hanging out with adults than I am teenagers. And that's a tough shift. But when we do, man, we're able to see fruit like you've been talking about, and empower others to make that impact on the next generation. So
but also just being willing to take on a completely different lens and see your volunteers and your youth leaders not just as hired help, but co-laborers with you. It really changes the heart that you have for your ministry, understanding that they bring gifts and they bring talents beyond what you may have, and it only causes you to have a bigger win if you're able to see them as co-laborers rather than just hired help or volunteers.
That's so good. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a while. That's really good. Well, Jeremy, like I said, you've shared so much great stuff today. I'm sure people are probably going to want to connect with you, maybe follow up on something you said, or pick your brain a little bit more. Where's the best way for people to connect with you?
So one of the best ways is either on Instagram or Twitter. You can find me. It's JM Veal, Veal. Those are the two best places to find me right now. I do have a website that will be launched soon. That'll just be jeremyveal.com. I've been asked to do some consulting and some coaching, and so I'm going through training for that. And so I've done a little bit of consulting here and there with some people, but I'll have a new website up here pretty soon. But Instagram and Twitter are the best places to find me right now.
That's cool. Yeah. So be sure to check those out. All those links are going to be in the show notes for the podcast. And be sure to connect with Jeremy if you have any questions or just want to pick his brain a little bit. Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thanks for all you're doing for the next generation, for your church, like wearing all these hats and doing a lot of different types of ministry that maybe you thought you never would be involved in. But it's clear that God is definitely using you in all that. So, man, God bless your ministry.
Hey, thanks, man. And thank you for this podcast, for the way that you're connecting with youth leaders all around and showing the better side of youth ministry. I greatly appreciate you a lot, man.
Thank you very much. Thanks again, Jeremy, for being on this episode of the podcast. And thanks to you all for tuning in for another episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. If you have not shared this with other youth workers who you think would enjoy this kind of content, be sure to do that. Share this with them and any podcast app out there and any podcast website out there. We're pretty much on every one of them. All those links are going to be in the show notes, including the links to connect with Jeremy and the link to check out the sponsor of this episode of the podcast, and that's G-Shades. So head over to gshades.org and be sure to use the promo code TSMPOD to save 10% off your order. Thanks so much, G-Shades, for sponsoring this episode of the Student Ministry Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great conversation all about student ministry, but until then, may God bless your ministry.